Now, the coalition's embarked on the most ambitious and controversial overhaul of the welfare state since its inception. And the man pushing the changes through, Ian Duncan Smith, has found himself joining a long line of politicians wondering who will rid me of a turbulent priest, after the new Archbishop of Canterbury voiced concerns at the impact of his plans. IDS thinks of himself as a man of morals, so didn't take kindly to his integrity being impugned. So who's right about the morality of cutting benefits? We turn to our very own Maniac Street preacher, the Reverend Giles Fraser. This is Take of the Week.
So we have a new Pope, Francis I, who's called himself, very interestingly, after Francis of Assisi, that Christian figure most associated with care and concern for the poor. And again, earlier this week, the bishops of the Church of England, led by the Archbishop of Canterbury, who is himself, it has to be said, no rabid Marxist, being an ex-oil man, have criticised the government for their cap on benefit increases, which means, in effect, a decrease in the amount of support given to the most vulnerable people in our society. On the one hand, the bishops of the Church of England are saying that there's something deeply wrong about forcing the vulnerable and children further and further into poverty. And the government is saying that welfare dependency is itself immoral and that you actually keep people poor through benefits. The thing that really winds me up is this language of strivers and shirkers. Because the reality is that nearly 3/4 of the children who live in what's classified as child poverty have at least one parent who are working. These are not people who are shirking their responsibilities. They are hard-working families trying to support their children. And I just don't think the government gets that at all. They're £1 each.
That's good, isn't it?
It's really good.
You fight your war, I fight for my life. You pay your dues and I will pay mine.
There's been loads of stories in the press about people with 11 children and having large mansions built for them by the state. But this, for me, is a classic piece of political misdirection, blaming the poor for something that wasn't their creation.
To feel some tenderness, do you have to give up?
The government has to decide whether this is a moral crusade to wean people off dependency, to promote self-help, or whether this is about shrinking the size of the deficit. And if it's the latter, then what we really need is more growth and less austerity. Austerity is the programme that is actually crippling places like this up and down the country. I've had my run-ins with the Church of England, but what gives the Church its moral authority is that it has a presence in every single community up and down this country, and it can see what's going on. And do you know what? The funny thing is, I think the bishops may be more in touch than the government is.
From the Roman Road Market in Tower Hamlets to our own little market here in the heart of Westminster, where we're unable to sell anything. Anyway, I'm told he's Britain's trendiest vicar. The Reverend Giles Fraser joins us. Welcome. Now, you say the bishops are more in touch with the people, but all the polls suggest that being tough on welfare is popular.
Yes, I mean, I think they're more in touch with what's going on the street. I mean, it's not a popularity. The bishops, luckily, don't get voted for, and they're not in a popularity contest. What they're in touch with is what's actually going on the ground. And what we see is, I think, the reality. I think they are.
I mean, I can see how vicars are and so on.
No, but I mean, the bishops are a part of dioceses and we're priests on the ground. I mean, my church, over this Christmas period, we had to open ourselves as a night shelter to cope for all those people who are now, you know, homeless. What we find with a lot of the people, I'm a parish priest in the Elephant and Castle, there's a lot of people there who are really hard-working, trying to support their families, and actually are really, the idea that their benefits get reduced is they're going to have to choose between heating and eating.
Do you think it is morally right that someone could be on benefits of £26,000 a year for doing nothing, which is higher than the average wage?
do you know what I think? What I dislike about this line of questioning, in a way, is that you end up thinking there's a sort of class of people who are really just shirking, and that's just not what I see. What I see is loads and loads of people. The majority of people who are on benefits are people who are actually working. They're working
what's the
hard.
answer to the question?
Well, I want to. It's absolutely right to encourage people into work. It's absolutely right to encourage people into work. But we mustn't use all of that rhetoric as a way of beating up the poorest and most vulnerable, especially as they're not the people that created this financial crisis in the first place.
If you're on
It's not their fault.
26,000 a week, you're not that poor or that vulnerable, are you?
Well,
if you've got 10 kids.
I have to say, and it also depends, it depends where you live. I mean, if you're living, I mean, some of these things like £500 a week, it sounds like an enormous amount of money, but if you're living with a load of children and you're living in the middle of London, or if you're living even in Tower Hamlets, where your housing benefit is astronomical, I mean, it's because housing prices are so high, and that's why people are being pushed out of the centre of London. And, I mean, the figures bear this out. The centre of London is down 21% in terms of housing benefit claims, and places like Newham are up 40%, and Barnet. We're actually seeing... Well, we're seeing London change character.
All
It's
right.
actually poor people are being pushed out of London. It's not fair.
What do you say to the Archbishop of Canterbury, who said, quote, "When times are hard, the duty to support the vulnerable should be felt more than ever, not disappear or diminish"?
There are lots of vulnerable people. I mean, what's so extraordinary about Giles here is that for the last 5 years, people on benefit have been getting higher increases than people in work. And did that raise a single letter from the bishops or any other vicar? No, they were quite happy for poor people who happen to be in work to see their real living standards declining year by year without a word of protest. But now that the government comes to redress the balance and say, right, since real wages have been rising much less quickly than real welfare benefits, we now have to tackle welfare benefits because otherwise we discourage people from going to work. Suddenly the bishops rise up in arms. And by the way, may I say how very unwise I think it is of Justin Welby, before he's even on his seat, to get involved in this kind of normal, boring left-wing politics, and what's more, to sign a letter along with another group of bishops. I mean, he should reserve his archiepiscopal authority for a blockbuster, not just sign up with some round-robin letter that's been issued by all the bishops.
Well, Michael, he's not a lefty. I mean, this guy was at the heart of capitalism as an oil man and so forth. And actually, I think this is exactly what he should be keeping his...
more dreary that he signed this predictable
No,
letter.
he gets it. And I think what he also gets is actually that there's a fundamental moral sort of priority for the church, which is to speak up for the people who are really, really vulnerable. And this language of, you know, shirkers, it's really unbecoming
But
of
Giles,
people to do that. It
from,
really
from
is,
a church
Michael.
man, this is absolutely absurd. The church is always distinguishing between people who live virtuous lives and people who are sinners. But when it comes to the welfare system, the church insists that the system wear a blindfold and pay no attention to whether people are doing, you know, things to try and get themselves into work, or whether they're working in the system. Now,
Well, the government just tar them all with the same brush.
if you really are down there in the street, you will know, because people know that there are people working in the system. I know that is a broader issue from the 1%.
You can use that as an excuse to bash a whole load of other people. We all know that there's a small...
bashing.
It is a form of bashing. Shirkers is
It's bashing when you're taking the benefits away on which they depend for any kind of meaningful existence.
Not
And I
taking
also
benefits
There aren't
away,
the jobs
you're
to go
increasing them-
into.
You're increasing the benefits by 1% a year, whereas in the past few years, the welfare benefits have gone up by more, 5% in the last
sneaky.
year.
That is
5% in the
that
last
is
year.
sneaky.
Yes,
It's
Alistair,
inflation's
hold on.
3%.
We need to
when
hear from
you-
Alistair.
that quote,
Excuse me,
that quote
Alistair.
that Andrew read out, and asked you whether you thought it was wise for the Archbishop to say something like that. David Cameron said that when he was leader of the opposition. We should be judged by how we treat the disadvantaged, by the least advantaged.
But they're not only people on
And-
benefit.
Yeah, I know that. But my point is
Why
that
don't you make a
the-
fuss
the
about people who
government-
aren't on benefit but are in work and aren't well
the
paid?
government, with this, it pretends that it's all about reducing the deficit, and Giles is absolutely right in his film that the way to do that is to get the economy going. We've got another budget coming out which will be full of more kind of nonsense from Osborne without a proper strategy. The Archbishop, I think, is if you don't have the bishops standing up for some of the most vulnerable people, who are many of them, I think, going into real penury, and with a government and a cabinet round that cabinet table who they don't know people like this. They haven't got a clue how these people
Labour
live
were
their
in
lives.
office today, they would do exactly the same.
I suspect they wouldn't. They'd have to get they'd definitely have to cut the deficit. I accept that.
By the way, Michael, the one thing is, it's not to make this about, not to make, I mean, I think it does the Tories no end of damage to make defending the poor a party political issue.
It's not the
this
Tory
is,
government,
this
you know,
is
it's a
not...
coalition government.
Yeah, no, it's a Tory government.
Eat your heart out, because the Liberal Democrats are doing this as well.
Right, well, then, well, I mean, I'm trying to say that it shouldn't be a party political issue.
The government that was elected by 60% of the people is doing
If you make
this.
defending the poor and the most vulnerable people in our society as something that you become a sort of party football, that's a really dangerous thing. This is not
where I live,
Tory
in Gospel Oak, there's been a by-election today. The Conservative candidate, that is her main leaflet today. She's lost, I'm glad to say, and Labour has won it very comfortably. The word Conservative does not appear. She knows that the Conservative brand is so toxic because what you're doing to people on benefits, that they're trying to go around saying it's this individual, nothing to do with David Cameron, nothing to do with the Conservatives, because the brand is toxic, while you continue to peddle this line that anybody who's on benefits is somehow skiving, shirking, and the rest. He's not saying that, but the government, I believe, is saying that. Exactly to get the sort of, what you've described as these successful poll ratings for being top on welfare.
It's just unbelievable how many inaccuracies there are in what you say. I mean, first of all, the government...
Challenge them one by one.
Well, first of all, the government is not saying that.
The government do say that.
Secondly, the government is not only
What's
arguing...
the thing about who are the people behind the curtains while we're all going to work?
Certainly, secondly,
Who are these
the
people
government
that
is
George
not
Osborne
only...
says?
Let him finish.
The government is not only arguing about austerity, it is arguing about the need to adjust the balance between welfare and pay, and I feel...
And the way to do that is to get the economy growing.
Right. Get the economy growing, by which your people mean borrow more money. There is no country in the European Union that has a
having
higher
a strategy
deficit
for
than
growth.
we have.
All right,
Other countries are managing to do it.
We've run out of time. Giles, you get the final word.
Well, I'm very frustrated. I do think this is a piece of really bad misdirection because, you know, we got put into this economy got put into this situation by people who are still getting paid vast benefits, and none of that's being tackled at all. You know, there's tax avoidance massively, and the people who are actually being targeted are the people who are the most vulnerable at the bottom of the heap. And I think it's a moral disgrace.
He'd be good, wouldn't he?
Why don't you go into politics?
I'm in the church. It is a form of politics.
Does it have to be left?
No, it's not. I'm not part of it.
Plenty of right-wing figures.
Didn't sound very right to me. He sounded pretty straightforward.
pretty right
and
to me.
coherent. Sounded more coherent left to me than I get from most politicians.
No, there we go.
Giles, thanks for being with us.